Well, we do want to involve our guests here at Town Hall. So we'll take some questions now for our speakers.
Yeah, a question for you, Yoram. I just wonder, where's the morality and the merit-based aspect of allowing an unlimited accumulation of wealth? Because you seem to basically espouse the idea nobody should be limited as to how much wealth they can accumulate. And that in a country where you have people working 3 jobs and having no health insurance, I just wonder where the morality is. I mean, especially in a country that calls itself and prides itself on Christian values, and I think Christianity at its base supposedly does not actually espouse that you have such a wealth disparity, right? I mean, and
okay. So let's let Yaron address that question.
So let me just make it clear in case I've been misunderstood. I'm a radical. I don't believe in the Christian morality. I think it's a corrupt morality. I think it's bad. I don't believe you're your brother's keeper. I don't believe you belong to anybody else. I believe in a morality of rational, long-term self-interest. I think your moral responsibility is to your happiness rationally pursued over the long term. So I don't believe in sacrifice. I don't believe your job is to take care of other people. I believe your job, each one of our job, is to take care of ourselves and make our lives the most flourishing, successful life it could be. And I don't believe, I want to ask the opposite question. What is the morality that says that I can't accumulate beyond a certain amount of wealth? What if I'm selling products that you guys love so much that you keep buying and you're buying more and more and more and I'm making a profit at it? Who are you to say, enough's enough, Bill Gates, from now on you have to give it away? Why do we live in a country where making wealth, creating value for people, trading with people value for value, is somehow despicable morality? But giving it away after you've made it, that's good. And if you want to make Bill Gates a saint, you know what he would do? He would give it all away, move into a tent, and he could somehow cut himself and bleed a little bit. While he did that, then we would declare him a saint. I'm against that morality. I don't believe that morality is a good morality. I think that's an evil morality. I'm for a morality that says, if Bill Gates producing stuff, and we're voluntarily, not being forced, voluntarily buying his stuff, and he's making a profit off of that, wonderful.
All right, let's have David. Do you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think that wealth is created by individuals acting alone in some heroic fashion. I think wealth is created by individuals working within a society where there are the foundations for wealth creation. The roads, the schools, the infrastructure, the legal system. And that society decides together how that wealth is used. Individuals don't get to decide completely on their own. And actually, this is not a view that I created out of the blue. This is a view that Andrew Carnegie famously espoused in his essay, Gospel of Wealth, published in the 19th century, in which he argued for an estate tax on the grounds that because society created wealth collectively and created opportunities for people like Carnegie, we needed to capture some of that wealth and recycle it so that opportunities were created for others. That's what redistributive tax policy is all about, creating opportunity for all. As for some of Yaron's other points, he said that he's been saying that, look, government shouldn't have to solve the problem because people will step forward to solve it with charity. Well, we know historically that wasn't the case. 35% of seniors lived in poverty in 1960. Charity didn't solve the problem. But Yaron goes further and says also that in his philosophy, nobody has an obligation to anybody else. So I don't get it. We're gonna, in his worldview, we get rid of government. We expect charity to solve it, and then we also espouse a philosophy of radical self-interest, which takes away anybody's sense of obligation for anybody else. That is a formula for a brutal, brutal society.
Thank you. Next question, please. Thank you, sir.
I would like to bring the discussion down to 2 very concrete issues that seem to me some of the greatest threats we're facing today. So one question for you, Yoram. I'm sorry I didn't get your last name.
Brook, that's fine.
Okay. Is how does your understanding of the role of government deal with what economists call negative externalities, which is simply pollution, which is the danger of global climate change in the world. And if I could ask you a question, David. I didn't get your last name either.
We'll go by David.
It's the question about Democrats who seem to join so eagerly in waging war for the purpose of gathering resources in the world because we realize we're running out of peak, not just oil, but peak everything. And finally, if I could ask Mr. McKay, I did get your last name, to include you so you wouldn't be left out.
Thank you. You're very kind.
One of the issues I have understood the courts are doing, and it's related to the role of government, is ruling that if we go to war, courts are ruling that's a political issue and make no judgment about whether the war is legal or illegal, despite the fact that our Supreme Court Justice Jackson in Nuremberg said initiating a war of aggression is the supreme international war crime. How do you understand the role of the courts in restricting the actions of the executive and the... That should last the three of you for I don't know how long. But thank you.
You guys can go now.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think our speakers are who people came to see tonight, but I think that the courts have had a very important role in determining accountability for international activities, especially for war crimes. And you yourself mentioned Nuremberg, but also the war crimes tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda for abuses that occur in what we consider to be the rules and laws of war.
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't make myself clear. Against ourselves.
Yeah.
The war invasion of Iraq is what I'm speaking of.
Sure. Well, I think maybe one of the best ways to consider this is the engagement of the United States Supreme Court on the question of Guantanamo Bay, where the executive branch displayed tremendous wide view of the power of the executive to hold individuals outside the United States in what could be seen as a perhaps constitution-free zone. The United States Supreme Court stepped in and said, not so fast. Individuals there have the right to petition for habeas corpus, the right to review the conditions and the basis of their confinement. A pretty dramatic conflict between the role of the United States government vis-a-vis its executive and war-making authority and the application of the United States Constitution in terms of human and individual rights. And so the court spoke loudly about the executive branch's view of what could go on at Guantanamo Bay and very much restricted the role of the United States government there. And we're going to see, I think, a continued trend in that way. So the U.S. Supreme Court taking an active role in the national security reach of the executive branch. So that's my answer to that question. I thank you for involving me. You made me feel more useful here because I think the better questions are coming from you than are coming from me. So let me turn to David first to answer the question that he posed to you.
Just really quickly, it's crazy to be fighting wars to defend resources, 12,000 miles away. We need a policy for developing renewable energy here at home. And in my mind, this is a great place for government to take a leading role. This is a strategic area, and I think that the best thing government could do would be to set a price on carbon. Push up the price of carbon, and the market will solve the rest of the problem. If we don't do that now, quite apart from the challenge of climate change, we're going to continue to be dependent upon oil from some of the most dangerous places on Earth.
Yaron, the question of externalities.
Well, they're related, I guess, because they all deal with oil, right? So I don't want to get into the foreign policy question of war. That'll take us a completely different direction. The idea that there's a renewable energy solution just around the corner is ridiculous. I mean, it's fantasy. It doesn't exist. 95% of all the energy in the world is from carbon sources. Accept that's going to be like that for a very long time. If there was really an alternative, you think the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley wouldn't be investing like crazy in it. All government is doing is throwing money at this problem. It'll be one of the biggest boondoggles in American history. So, the idea that windmills and solar panels are going to solve the problems in Seattle in terms of producing enough energy for us to continue to consume the way we are today, forget it. The only way to do this is to have a carbon tax and to lower our standard of living dramatically. And that's exactly what happens when government intervenes. Standard of living go down. I don't want my standard of living to go down. I would like to continue to use gasoline and natural gas and carbon reducing. But to the issue of externalities. First, I have to point out that people always talk about negative externalities, but I want to talk about positive externalities, which are far more dominant than negative externalities, and for which you pay nothing. We're in Seattle, so I'll keep on Bill Gates. What the hell, right? Bill Gates is a huge positive externality to every one of your lives if you live in this community. The number of jobs, the number of facilities, the wealth created in Seattle because he chose to locate Microsoft here and to build this business. And yes, he didn't do it alone. Surprise, surprise, he actually paid people to work with him, and he played his suppliers, and and if one day there was such a thing as private infrastructure, he paid for the private infrastructure. So there are no free lunches. I completely agree. The whole society is involved, but that's what the price system does. It rewards people for the degree of their involvement. Employees who came early contributed more, they get more money. Employees who came late get less money because they contributed less. In terms of negative externalities, my solution to negative externalities is private property. You can't dump your garbage in my backyard. We know that. We've established that in the court system for a very long time. Let's get innovative. First of all, let's sell the commons. Let's create private property everywhere, including on water, including in creative ways over the air. And let's figure out how to protect our private property. Each one of us, just like we protect our backyard from our neighbor polluting it with his garbage, there are creative, private, legal ways in which we can protect ourselves from harm delivered to us through the water and through the air. We don't need massive government regulatory agencies in order to achieve that. Indeed, I think it's just slowing down the process. I think we'd live in a cleaner environment. Human beings now would live in a cleaner environment if we got rid of the EPA. I think it slows down progress. Progress is towards cleanliness, not towards dirt. We're far, and my last point on this.
Yeah, please conclude because we want
human environment today. The human environment today is the cleanest it's ever been in human history. It's cleaner than in the cave. It's cleaner than in the hut when you were subsistence farming. It's cleaner than London in the 19th century where there was horse manure everywhere. Industry, capitalism, technology are a movement towards cleanliness, not a movement away from it. So all we need is freedom, and you'll have a clean environment.
Thank you for the question.
This is a question for both speakers. So government is government of people. And what's the proper government would depend on what your view of people is. What kind of creatures, what kind of circumstance, how do people live, what are their capabilities, what are their competencies, how should they live? And I wonder if both speakers could address fundamentally, how do you view people?
David.
I think people are moral animals who believe in cooperation because it's in their self-interest. I believe human beings have a high degree of empathy for other human beings and that there are evolutionary reasons for that. When you cooperate, when you make sacrifices of your own self in order to strengthen your community, you get long-term rewards. And I think that the government we have, in which people are making sacrifices, they're letting some of their wealth be redistributed to help others, is reflection of that basic empathy and desire to advance the common good.
Do you want to address that as well?
Yeah, sure. I believe that the fundamental here is that people are rational, that they need to use their minds, they need to use reason in order to improve their lives, in order to achieve happiness, in order to create the values. All the values around here are products of the human mind, and that the human mind thrives. It is possible to reason, to think, to be rational when one is free of force. And that is why the role of government is to leave us alone, to be able to exercise our rationality, to be able to be rational, be reasonable, create stuff. And that is why the role of government is to leave us alone, to be able to exercise our rationality, to be able to be rational, be reasonable, create stuff, pursue values. And that the government, when it tries to tell us how and what we should do, and who we should help and who we shouldn't help, and we should be charitable and we should be this or that, it is restricting our ability to think about what truly is in our rational self-interest. It is restricting our ability to reason. I'm all for cooperation, I'm against sacrifice, and I'm against forced cooperation. I'm against slave camps of any kind. I'm for free people voluntarily cooperating with one another in a rational way.
Thank you for the question. Next question.
Yes. David, I have a question for each of you, actually. But, David, my question for you is, it seems that your view is it's better to be a slave than to be poor. And I kind of want to see how you feel about my statement and hear your argument. And then for Yaron, my question for you is, when government fails to do as we want through the democratic process, is there a point where it's proper to have a revolution, to initiate force? And if so, what does society look like at that point?
David?
I think that Yaron said that he believed in voluntary cooperation among free people. That is what democracy happens to be. We have that here in the United States. Not as much as we like, because there's too much wealth and power in the hands of a tiny elite who are using that to get an outsized voice in our democracy. But fundamentally, we have a democracy, we have a social contract, and together we are making decisions which actually have made us a lot richer. We've become a much wealthier society over the past 70 years, in part because of the proactive role of government and the decisions that we have made together to strengthen government, to enable us to build more wealth, to invest in our human capital, invest in our physical capital.
Is there a choice, though, must we choose between freedom and slavery?
I don't think that slavery is on the table here. Nobody's talking about slavery. I think that the closest thing we've come to slavery in this country is when we had slavery, and it was slavery that was a institution run by the free market, unchecked by government. We had the Civil War. We had the Civil War.
Okay. All right. So we've raised the question of freedom, the question of slavery. The question to you was, is it so bad? Do we have revolution coming? And where do you stand on revolution?
Let me just quickly address the issue of slavery.
Okay.
No matter what created slavery, it was forcibly created slavery. Clearly, I'm advocating for a government that extracts force and therefore that abolishes slavery. You know, slavery is wrong, and it's the government's job to make sure it doesn't happen. And I agree about the Civil War. I think we should have gone to war in the Civil War because rights were being violated. That's the job of government, to stop the violation of rights. What was the question?
Well, if I might rephrase it and say, if it is your position that government has failed in such a massive way in terms of its philosophy and its execution, what do we do? Do we have a revolution?
Look, the Founding Fathers revolted against state government for a lot less than what we have to suffer under our government. A lot less. A stamp tax, a tax on tea. I mean, in Seattle, they're taxing coffee. Everything is taxed. So, but look, it's a different context and a different world. And I am not an advocate for armed revolution, for many reasons, among others, that we'd lose. What I am for is this is fundamentally, there's a sense in which government needs the sanction of the people in order to govern. People agree with David. That's why we've got the government that we have. The people, the overwhelming majority of the people, believe in one form or another, slightly to the left, slightly to the right, with David. If you believe in something different, what we need to do is convince them that they're wrong. It's to convince them that their ideas are wrong. This is an intellectual, philosophical, ideological battle. Right? But it's a battle of the mind. It's a battle of reason. It is not a battle of arms. And we're not going to win the battle unless we engage it at this level and try to convince enough people that the way we're heading is the wrong way.
I think
that's the only way. That's the only way.
Yeah, I think you've covered the ground. Let's go to the next question, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for spending your evenings here with us. It's my understanding from what you're saying that people are both inherently tending towards violence, and also that humans are also inherently selfish. Rand wrote about the virtue of selfishness, and you spoke about acting in your own self-interest on the basis of morality. So I was wondering if you could comment on the role of corruption in your respective ideal governments. How do you catch the Bernie Madoffs if the SEC doesn't have regulations and check? And how do you solve the rampant corruption that we have in our government that we see now that's costing so many taxpayer dollars and is the basis of so much
Let me ask Yaron to take that first. And I might amend part of that to say, well, how big and robust must government to be to catch all of the Bernie Madoffs that you would say would be out there?
Unfortunately, we don't catch them all because we're too busy with other stuff. Let me first say, just to correct you, I don't believe that people are inherently selfish. But let me be very clear on this. I think to be selfish requires hard work. My conception of selfishness is the pursuit of your self-interest rationally and over your lifetime. This requires really figuring out what's in my best interest, what's good for me, what's bad for me, how should I live my life so that I live a flourishing life. Aristotle talked about this. What are the virtues I should pursue to live the best life that I can live as a human being? That to me is hard work. That's not a common view of selfishness as just doing whatever you feel like or in a momentary sense, lying, cheating, stealing. That's all out in my perception of selfishness. Selfishness is truly about rationally figuring out what's good for you in the long term. Now, how do we catch Bernie Madoff? Look, police work is a technical issue. How do you do it? There are lots of ways. In the case of Bernie Madoff, it was actually pretty easy. Because some of the people who wanted to invest with Bernie Madoff went over there, looked at his books, just a little bit, whatever books he was willing to show, and said, this is a fraud. And I'm going to call the cops. And they did. And there's a hedge fund manager who wrote a nice memo to the SEC. He sent it twice, about 6 years before they finally caught him, elaborating on this as being a fraud. I think it's not hard. When all you're trying to do is catch crooks, it's not hard to catch them. But let me argue something a little bit more radical. There are a lot less crooks under capitalism than there are with regulations. Regulations are almost purposefully ambiguous, leave all these loopholes, make it, and we live in a moral code where businessmen are taught, do whatever you can get away with, right? And it creates these huge ambiguities and very difficult court cases. Fraud, real fraud, where people are cheating their investors, is relatively easy to detect and relatively easy to prosecute. I don't think you need a huge government. I think certainly the Justice Department could be, I think, quite a bit smaller. I don't know how big the police force is.
Enough to get the bad guys.
You need enough to get the bad guys.
Okay.
That's
Our other speaker tonight is the author of a book called The Cheating Culture and the Moral Center. I think from that perspective, you may be able to answer each of the strands that were raised in this question.
Yeah. I said at the beginning in my remarks that capitalism was a great system in many ways. It's fantastic at producing wealth. It's very dynamic. It rewards hard work and creativity, but it also has some downsides. I looked at and talked about inequality being one of the downsides, but another of the downsides is that capitalism, when it's not properly regulated, tends to become corrupt. Its institutions tend to become corrupt. Corporations and the business world tends to become corrupt. And as well, capitalism, unregulated, tends to corrupt the political process. So in terms of the corruption of capitalism, of business, I mean, we have seen that in spades over the past 12 years. You know, everybody talks about the financial crisis we just went through, a crisis that occurred in part because, just to take one example, the ratings agencies, which were supposed to tell us whether or not these subprime mortgages were sound, were compromised, had a major conflict of interest with the companies that they were rating. Deep corruption throughout the real estate and mortgage industry as well, with very lax regulation of mortgage brokers, lax regulation of appraisers, lax regulation at every step in that way, and that helped produce the collapse we saw. Remember, there was a housing bubble in almost every developed country in the world. It turned into a financial crisis here because of weak watchdogs and weak government. Now, in terms of the corruption of capitalism inherently corrupts politics because wealth inequality gets translated into political muscle and influence over the political process. The financial industry spent $3 billion lobbying Washington between 1992 and 2007 in order to loosen the regulations, to water down the rules, to let it do whatever it wanted to. And that's the kind of, and how do we deal with that? We've got to get money out of politics. We need tougher rules on lobbyists. We need to do a number of things to take our democracy. You're
not suggesting here that those regulations are actually the cause of the problem, that the regulations themselves are spawning the bad conduct. Is that true?
That is totally false. I mean, when we lived, remember, during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and into the 80s, before the systematic attack on regulation of our financial industry, we did not have the kinds of scandals and crashes that we've seen in just the past 12 years. We did not have the Enrons, the WorldComs, the Tycos, not to mention the Goldman Sachs, the Countrywides, and all the stuff we've just seen. We had some financial instability. We had some scandals in the 70s. One reason we had the accounting scandals later on is because we didn't respond effectively to those accounting scandals in the 70s. Those regulatory changes were never made. The accountants were writing their own rules in Washington, and that's how the system is broken.
Thank you.
Quick.
Very quick.
Before Justice Bond went after Microsoft spent in Washington $0. Zero. Today, Microsoft spends 9 figures in Washington annually. Silicon Valley is a huge investor in lobbying in Washington. Before the Justice Department started this, they spent nothing.
Let me just clarify. You're referring to another Washington. Is that correct?
I'm going to Washington, D.C. I'm sorry.
Far away
Washington,
from this
DC,
Washington.
Far away from this one.
Thank you, because the clarification is important.
Yes.
We appreciate that.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you
I thought
for
there
your
was
question.
only one. I'm sorry.
No,
and just a quick warning, we have about 5 minutes left.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. The questions are excellent. Please bring them forward.
I will try to be quick. This just has me going nuts, I have to say.
Maybe we've been successful.
Just in full disclosure, I'm a big government Democrat, no question. But I have run into government 1,000 times when I thought this is the stupidest thing that could ever be. But it doesn't happen more often in government than it does in the private sector. With Wells Fargo, with Comcast, with Sprint, with every single private sector entity I deal with. They are stupid, they assume I'm cheating, and they have regulations based on the assumption that I'm cheating, and it makes it all more expensive. So I think we've got two structures here that are arguing as if it is between one and the other. And my real question is, why do we believe that this is about government versus free enterprise? The American system of government was not, those founding fathers, I read a lot of the Federalist Papers, not all of them, they weren't talking about John Locke, they weren't talking about economics, they were talking about Roman systems and Athenian systems, and they were talking about government and how human beings are at risk of abusing power. And in government, we tried to set up a system to regulate the abuse of power, and we have no such system in free enterprise to regulate the abuse of power.
Okay.
So here's my question, and I just want in America, we get a credit for free enterprise, which is built not so much on free enterprise for the first 200 years as it was on free land.
Is there a question? We need to have a question here.
Okay. The question is, why, what was the role of the free land
We'll
in
ask
the
that
growth?
question. Thank you very much.
Can we take another question as well?
I think that's a good idea. We'll take two questions. We'll answer the role of free enterprise and take a second question as our last question. We'll answer both together and give our speakers an opportunity to address both.
Why, on an evening where we're having a discussion of first principles of democracy and freedom, has there been absolutely no, not one, mention that our freedom is about ready to be taken away with the two stealth provisions put in the Defense Authorization Act of 2012, House SB 1867, and it's about ready to be voted on tomorrow?
What is your question, ma'am?
My question is, why are we not talking about this, because it's about ready to happen tomorrow?
All right. I will leave that open to our questioners. We'll take one more question.
This question is to both of you. I was wondering if both of you could try to define for me the common good and what that means to everyone, not just in this room but across America. What is the common good? Because I've heard that all over the news and everywhere, and I've never really heard it defined before.
That's a tremendous final question, along with the two previous questions, and we'll give, in answering those, each of our speakers an opportunity to sum up their comments. So let's see. We started, I think, with David. Why don't you start, and we'll give Yaron an opportunity to close.
I think that the society we want to build is a society of balance, a society where the American value of mutual obligation, which is a strong value, is respected and upheld and advanced through government. Civil society can play a role as well, but I think government has a dominant role in ensuring that we take care of one another. And it's also about ensuring a strong free enterprise system. These are not mutually antagonistic ideas. Government and business have often worked together historically to create more wealth and opportunity for more people. And, it's about striking the right balance. And I think that we have often done that in the past century, particularly in that early post-war period where we've had strong free enterprise but also strong government. I believe we can do it again. And so that would be one definition I'd have of the common good, a balanced society where you have both strong government and dynamic free enterprise. They are certainly not antagonistic inherently.
Yaron.
So it's no surprise that you haven't heard definitions of the common good, because there is no such thing. There is no such thing as the common good. All there is individual goods. And we can create a society in which individuals can thrive by pursuing their good, or we can create a society in which some sacrifice others for their benefit. Now, those some might be the rich. Those some might be unions. Those some might be politicians. They might be whoever. They're all bad. The idea of sacrificing some people to other people is bad. The kind of society... I don't want balance. I don't want a little bit of poison. I don't want a little bit of sacrifice. I don't want a little bit of violation of my freedom. I want to be free. I want each one of you to be free. I want a society in which those freedoms, those individual freedoms, are protected. And that is the job of government. And just the one question that was here about the marketplace. It's really important, and everybody does this, but it's really important. We don't have a free market today. So when Sprint or whoever treats you badly, that's not the free market. Sprint is a heavily regulated business. All these businesses are heavily regulated. There's no competition in cable. There's no competition in these services. There's no competition in rating agencies. The three are granted by the SEC monopoly power over rating. Guess what? They don't do very well in their function because they're a government-granted monopoly. There is no free market to fail. There is no capitalism qua free of government. What we have is a mixture of lots of government controls and regulations and some freedom. The reason we've been successful over the last 100 years is because that mixture has not gotten too toxic. That is, the amount of freedom left in our society has allowed business to create the wealth, to create the products, to create the goods that have allowed us to thrive and be successful. But that mixture is becoming more and more and more toxic to the point where I agree with that CBO study. Incomes in the United States today are flat to declining. Economic growth is flat to declining. Our freedoms are declining. So I'm an advocate of individual freedom, individual rights, no common good. Government, stay out of my life, except to protect me from Bernie Madoff and Jack the Ripper.
Thank you very much. Let me just thank you. Let me just add a couple of quick words of thanks. First to Seattle's own town hall for hosting this event. To all of you for participating in it tonight. Thank you very much. I think all of us would agree that one important role of our government is to allow this kind of criticism and debate to flourish. And so I thank all of you for joining us, for the opportunity to be here to listen to two tremendous individuals debate this issue. I want to thank David Callahan for being here with us, and Yaron Brook for being here with us, and all of you for joining us here. This debate didn't begin in the 5 series of debates that these institutions and organizations and individuals have been involved in. It began perhaps on the Acropolis in Athens. We've had this debate about the role of governments as long as there have been governments. It's a healthy debate, and I want to thank our two debaters, and please join me in thanking them for their great work tonight.